Sleep. Chapter 1. The University. I, Karol Dragomir, looked over my shoulder, taking what I knew would be my last look at the Endemir University of Arcane Arts. Unimaginative asses, all of them, I thought as I adjusted the pack on my back and started down the street toward the east gate of the city. Apparently, while the masters at the university had no qualms using the corpses obtained for research purposes to teach students of the necromantic arts on how to animate our corpses, they balked at the thought of even trying to instill these empty shells with enough consciousness to be useful. This was a challenge I had been thinking about for 6 years, since I arrived at the university and saw the mindless ones sweeping hallways and the library corridors. My instructors claimed that attempting to reawaken the mind of the dead was immoral, against the will of the gods. This coming from the same instructors that gleefully teach us to crush the bones of a living being from within, to choke the life out of a victim from across the room. They dare to judge something to be immoral? I spat onto the street as I recalled their hypocrisy. I should have been preparing my elixirs for the first test of the process. I had been working on these formulae in secret for the past 2 years. Countless hours were spent poring over tomes, ancient and new, in the university library. Still, more time was spent in deep discussions with the mutagenic practitioners of alchemy, always careful to keep the details of my plan secret. I could not sleep, at least not restfully. Even in my dreams I saw possibilities, things to try, avenues of research to explore. I remember the determination I felt as my desire coalesced into a concept, and my joy as that concept sharpened into a plan. I was sure I would produce what I saw. An undead servant capable of comprehending more than 1 or 2 simple commands. A servant that would actually be useful. I had even envisioned demonstrating my theory with those short-sighted instructors at my side. I took glee in imagining their gasps of amazement as my creation responded as a thinking being would. Instead, I was walking through the east gate of Endemir, headed deeper into the frontierlands to find some town, some village, quiet enough and remote enough to allow me to finish my experimentation in peace. I would need to find a village with a graveyard, and a place to set up a workspace where I would not be disturbed. A place where the superstitious locals would not even know I was there, for I knew the way the common folk viewed the necromancer. They would not want me reanimating their loved ones. But what choice was there? I needed to find a place to complete my work. Chapter 2. On the Road. I was on the road for several weeks. First traveling east along the Farsi coast to South Cove, then south into the frontier's interior. There were a few hamlets along the road in addition to the towns of Meadows End and Laketon, but while all had graveyards, all were either too conspicuously located to permit me to do what I needed to do, or they were so infrequently added to that I would not have been able to find a sufficiently fresh corpse. Many nights I rested along the roadside, too uncomfortable to sleep. Other nights I had few coins I could afford for inn rooms, but only uncomfortable, common room accommodations, and again, discomfort kept sleep from me. Then I came to Dryad Falls. This was a large town with a cemetery separated from the town by a stretch of forest. It was secluded, and the town was sufficiently populated that it suffered deaths at least one every few days. I was able to break into a mausoleum that looked like it had not been visited in decades. There I set up my experiments and concocted my elixirs. 2 days later, the undertakers delivered me my first experimental subject. After digging up that night, I arranged the body and other accoutrements as required for the reanimation ritual. But as I performed the rites, it became clear that something was wrong. The body reanimated, but it lunged clumsily for me, clearly seeing me as either threat or prey, certainly not its master. Fortunately, the creature did not move well, so I was able to easily escape it. After leading it away from the mausoleum, I was able to circle back and recover all my equipment and supplies. But I realized that my animated creature was heading to the town, and so it became obvious that I could no longer stay and work here. The town would be able to deal with the creature easily enough, but it would also investigate, and I would surely be found. And so, instead of the sleep of triumph that I had looked forward to, I would instead spend the night fleeing yet another town. During the week's journey to the next town, Fabridge Crossing, I was able to review my ritual notes and realize my error. At least I could expect to perform that part of my experiment correctly next time. During the evenings of my journey, and the anticipation of success and the fear of abject failure competed to prevent me from getting any decent rest. I had hoped that Fabridge Crossing would be suitable, but the graveyard was next to their church, and the church was in town square. I recall thinking it odd for the town's boneyard to be in the heart of the village, but these rustics on the frontier do strange things. Regardless, this town would not do. Perhaps Carnstown, about 2 weeks' journey from here, would be more appropriate. It was known to be a large but mostly lawless town, so I truly hoped my search would end favorably there. At the end of another day of walking past the occasional farmstead nestled into the forest, I sought a place to make camp. Coming upon a roadside clearing, I tried to get some sleep, but as was the case every night on the road, sleep was fitful and unsatisfying. In the morning, as I was about to depart, though, I heard what sounded like crying coming from deeper in the wood. Creeping forward, I spied a clearing with a number of wooden markers planted in the ground. Had I stumbled upon a farmstead graveyard? At the far side stood several people gathered in a half circle with their backs toward me. They watched as one man shoveled dirt. The women were sobbing. After a moment, the people all left, never noticing me as I skulked at the edge of the forest. Where they were standing were 2 new markers at the end of 2 fresh piles of dirt. I could not believe my luck. Not one fresh body, but 2. 2 chances to realize my life's work. And this place was as remote as I could have hoped for. I resolved to return in the night, open the graves, and conduct my tests. I set up a new camp deep in the woods and attempted to get some rest. I knew it would be a long night, so sleep now would be helpful. But with the anticipation, I could not sleep. After the sunset, I returned. Digging through the fresh, soft earth was easy, and I soon had both bodies uncovered. They appeared to be young, strong men, felled by injuries. One with a crushed chest, the other with a deep gash from shoulder to heart. I hauled them out of their earthen beds and arranged them in the circle needed for the reanimation ritual. I conducted the reanimation ritual more carefully, making sure not to make the same errors as last time. My care was rewarded. At the end of the ritual, I had 2 docile zombies waiting my commands. All that stood between me and triumph was to administer my elixir and await the transformation. Handing the vial to one of the pair, I directed it to drink, and it did. The transformation was rapid, but not what I anticipated. Initially, the undead being collapsed, writhing, as if fighting with itself. But when the convulsion subsided, the creature looked up at me not with the eyes of intelligence, but with the eyes of rage and hatred. It leapt for me, and sunk its sharp teeth into my shoulder before I could even react. I do not recall how I managed to get out of its grasp, or how I managed to outrun it. When I regained my composure, I found myself running down the road toward Carnstown. My face was bleeding from claw marks. My shoulder throbbed painfully where it had been bitten. I ran until I could run no farther, and collapsed on the side of the road. But though I was exhausted and hurt, my sleep was tortured by pain and horrid nightmares. When I awoke, I knew I was in trouble. I was feverish, and after being attacked by a creature such as I had inadvertently made last night, I knew what that meant. I was infected, and if I let this infection take me, I would die, then rise as a creature just like him. As I fumbled through my pack, I realized I did not even remember grabbing it in my escape. Somewhere in my pack, though, I had elixirs to treat diseases such as this, but I could not find them. In fact, several vials were missing. They must have fallen out in my haste to grab the pack and run. It appeared at least that all my raw ingredients were there. I could make more elixir if I had a quiet, safe place to work. I recall hearing from the Fabridge Crossing townsfolk that there was an inn along this road. If I could just reach it, if I could concoct the elixir I needed to survive. I was tired and sick, but I had no choice but to move on, hoping the inn was close enough to reach before nightfall. It barely was. There were fewer than a dozen patrons in the inn when I arrived. Though I was brusque with him, the innkeeper was kind, accommodating, and asked no questions. He showed me to a private cabin behind the inn and promised to leave me in peace. Except for an old woman who brought me a bowl of stew and a pot of tea, I was indeed alone. Rummaging through what was left in my pack, I realized to my dismay that I was missing one key ingredient for my antidote. But I was tired. So tired. In the morning, I would find what I needed and heal myself. Collapsing on the bed, raging with fever now, I tried to sleep, but I could not. And so, I was still awake as I felt death's cold, icy fingers slowly closed around my throat in the dead of the night. Chapter 3. Hungry. Hungry. I recall awakening in a dark, quiet place. I was confused. I was certain I was about to die. It appeared that even in death I could not sleep. And then I sensed the rage and the hunger, the ravenous hunger. I felt a desire to seek out living flesh and devour it. But at the same time I realized it wasn't really me feeling these feelings. I was there inside this raging, ravenous mind. But these were not really my thoughts. I felt them, I shared them. They were not mine. As the true owner of these sensations began to push and dig and claw upward through the dirt that enveloped it, I realized I was an observer, but an observer from within the beast. My mind was trapped deep within the raging mad creature, powerless to direct it or help myself. I recall wondering, was it my mind, or was it my very soul that was trapped so? After many minutes of clawing, my host broke free of the grave. For it was most certainly a grave that had enveloped it. Looking around, I realized we were behind the inn, some distance beyond the cabins, and near a few small plowed and planted fields that no doubt serviced the inn's kitchen. Sniffing the air, we launched ourselves toward a small home located among the fields. We approached the house rapidly and thrust ourselves out the door, attempting to break it down and get at the fresh, live meat within. We could smell it, and the odor enhanced the hatred and rage. We hated it, but we needed to feed on it. We pounded at the door repeatedly, urged on by the cries and sobs of whoever it was on the other side of the portal. But before we could get through the stout wooden door, another odor reached us, more fresh meat. Turning, we saw several living beings not protected by walls and doors. A fresh meal out in the open for us to feast on. I recall noticing the moonlight glinting off the sharp blades held by these beings. I immediately understood the import of these blades, but the raging creature that was in control either did not see them or did not care. We approached this new prey, and I sensed the creature was my host and jailer trying to choose which to feast upon first. The axe blade cut deep into the bloodless flesh of the creature that I had become. Once, twice. With the third strike, I watched my headless body remain standing, twitching for a moment as my head struck the ground and rolled. My still open eyes saw my body finally crumble and lie still. I felt the hunger within me fading. The rage against anything that lived was receding. It seemed as if I was finally being released from the tiny prison in which my mind was trapped. My body would be my own once more, if only for another moment before death took me again. But I felt a peace begin to overtake me, such as I had never known before. I had dreams of creating a useful servant, but I now know that even if I had succeeded, I would merely have created a prison for a mind. The spark that was me, my mind, my soul, was helpless as this creature sniffed and hunted for living flesh. The remnant of my mind could do nothing to quell the hatred that raged as it tried to tear down the door. I felt nothing but terror and revulsion as I sensed its anticipation of ripping into living flesh and consuming it. Even if I had created a docile servant, I realized it would have been nothing more than an eternal hell for the mind and soul of the being whose body it was trapped within. It is better that I failed, and I am grateful to the axe that freed me from my prison. My instructors at the university had been right all along. Now, finally, I am at peace. No longer driven by my dreams. No longer driven by anything. Now, finally, I can sleep.